The year is 2009, and mobile gaming is a disaster. The games are clunky, confusing, and forgettable. Then a tiny Finnish company with 12 employees and almost no money steals an idea and releases a game about birds flinging themselves at pigs. It flops on launch, but with a couple small tweaks, they go from invisible to the #1 app in the world, generating over $9.5 billion in revenue. A little over a decade later, the owners were actively hiding the game that had made them billions, sales had collapsed, and the company would eventually be sold in a deal that became a nightmare for its new owners. But how does the maker of the most downloaded mobile game in history become completely irrelevant? To understand that, we need to go back to 2003 because the seeds of their destruction were already visible. 3 students enter a mobile gaming competition sponsored by Nokia and HP. They come up with a new idea of a basic real-time multiplayer game which they would name King of the Cabbage World. This impresses the judges and leads them to winning the competition. Not long after, they would ask HP executive Peter Vasterbacker what they should do next. His answer was blunt: start making games. So they form a company called Reload, which would later be changed to Rovio Mobile. They doubled down on their first game, expanded it, and sold it to Sumia, which renamed it to Mole War. The game would then go on to be one of the first commercially successful real-time multiplayer mobile games. And this sheds light onto an important point. Their first hit came from a simple original idea people understood immediately. From there, they start building games for hire. They work with Electronic Arts, Real Networks, and anyone who was willing to pay them. They develop mobile games like Need for Speed Carbon, SWAT Elite Troops, and Shopping Madness. 6 years later, in 2009, they had 51 games developed and 0 hits. The company at this point was bleeding money and facing bankruptcy. In the words of the company's lead designer, Rovio only had enough money to make one more game. So desperate times call for desperate measures, and they steal an idea from a game named Crush the Castle, which at the time was only available on browser. Nothing like it existed in the App Store, so if they could develop their mobile app first, they could reap the rewards. The team goes to work and comes up with something simple: round birds, a basic slingshot, and green pigs. The idea was so basic, even the developers thought it was a bad idea. Jaakko Isolo actually said, "We realized we needed a recognizable mechanism to launch the birds. I came up with the slingshot, but it seemed too obvious, too easy. So we tried different things for a while, even a swing, but with the slingshot, players just understood what they were meant to do immediately." Finally, Jaakko would show the heads of Rovio a screenshot of what he had created, and to quote Nicholas Head, the co-founder of Rovio, "People saw this picture and it was just magical." So the game got the green light. Months into development, Nicholas described the night his mother overcooked a Christmas turkey because she couldn't stop playing the game. He said, "She doesn't play any games. I realized this is it." 8 months of development, a budget that went from 25,000 euros to nearly 100,000, and a project that was nearly abandoned twice. Angry Birds would finally launch in December of 2009, beating Crush the Castle to the App Store by over a month. The problem was nobody was downloading it. The UK and US market were simply too competitive to stand apart in, and on top of that, Rovio had no ad budget, no platform relationships, and no leverage to artificially boost the app's visibility. Rovio's head of marketing, Matt Wilson, said, "We realized very early on it would be tough to break into those markets, so we tried to get a following in the smaller nations." So they targeted smaller markets like Sweden and Denmark, where a great game had a real chance to rise. Slowly, downloads began to build, 30 to 40,000 across a handful of countries. It wasn't a hit, but it proved people liked the game. At this point, Rovio knew they needed more visibility, so they would visit a company called Chalingo, a British mobile publisher with direct App Store access and previous app success. They presented the data, and Chalingo signed on. February 11th, 2010. This was their make or break moment. They had done absolutely everything possible to promote the game. A YouTube trailer, 42 new levels, a free light version, a targeted PR push, and one Apple App Store feature in the UK. Within days, Angry Birds was the #1 paid app in the UK. By June, it had surpassed Doodle Jump to become the #1 game in the US App Store, and by 2011, Angry Birds would even beat social networking app Facebook and Skype to claim the coveted title of the most downloaded app. The company would grow dramatically in size, from a team of 12 people to 2 years later having 518 people on payroll. This forced the company into a situation where they needed to make more money, so Rovio went looking at 2 avenues. The first was straightforward: make more Angry Birds. So they came up with 14 spin-offs: Angry Bird Seasons, Rio, Space, Star Wars, a kart racer, and RPG. Many of the games received positive reviews, but nothing was groundbreaking. Their second move was licensing. Rovio followed Disney's model and began turning Angry Birds into toys, clothing, cookbooks, theme park attractions, and hundreds of other products worldwide. It was extremely popular for the moment, Even the Angry Birds soda they released in Finland outsold Coca-Cola and Pepsi. By 2013, merchandise made up nearly half of Rovio's revenue, and globally, Angry Birds consumer products had generated over $2 billion. From the outside, Rovio looked like a media empire in the making. However, as many brands know, merchandise can go out of fashion very quickly, and Rovio would learn this the hard way. Marketing law number 1: the more products you have, the weaker your brand becomes. Take the line extension. One day a company is tightly focused on a single product that is highly profitable, the next day the same company is spread thin over many products and is losing money. Al Ray's The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. In 2012, Rovio's operating profit was 55.5 million euros. By 2014, it was down to 10 million euros, and in 2015, it would record a 13 million euro loss, which marked a giant collapse for the company. On top of that, Rovio was facing another major issue they hadn't seen coming: a huge shift in mobile gaming. How do you survive when your biggest competitors suddenly start giving away their games for free? While Rovio was busy merchandising, the mobile market was changing. Clash of Clans and Candy Crush, both launched in 2012, were free to download and made money through in-app purchases. Players were spending over $4 million per day on Candy Crush alone. Rovio's 99-cent model was starting to feel outdated, so they made two moves. First, Rovio invested $73 million in the Angry Birds movie. That was a major gamble. Film analyst Stephen Follows found that of 3,715 feature films released in US cinemas between 2000 and 2015, only 41% made a profit, while 59% actually lost money. Still, Rovio CEO Katie Lovarenta said expectations for the film are very strong. Then Rovio tried to modernize the games themselves. They released Angry Birds 2 and introduced energy timers, booster prompts, and in-app purchases, features borrowed from the biggest games at the time. But Rovio was entering a business it didn't fully understand. Fans who had paid 99 cents for a game now felt pressured into spending more, and on Reddit, players said, "I stopped playing 3 weeks ago, the treasure pass, promos, and crashes started making me mad. I hate Rovio. Seriously, this game's gotta be rigged." Looking at the downloads, the launch of Angry Birds 2 was a massive success. By the end of 2015, the game had racked up close to 50 million downloads. On the revenue side, however, things looked much gloomier, as the game had only generated roughly $10 million. All things said and done, 2015 was a terrible year for Rovio, but moving forward into 2016, the company's luck would change. The developers would take the feedback from players and try to figure out in-app purchases. The updates in 2016 introduced several core mechanics such as the leveling up of birds and the slingshot, daily challenges, and player versus player arena. With each update, the game's revenue peaked to new heights without declining to the previous lows. After these changes, Angry Birds 2 would become Rovio's biggest moneymaker to date. And on top of that, by some miracle, the movie would become a commercial success and generate $352 million at the box office. But after you take away all the fees from theaters, marketing, and distribution, Rovio likely ended up taking home around 20 to 30 million euros in profit after its $73 million bet. Now Rovio was starting to get its footing back, and it certainly didn't need any more stress, so that's when they decided to take the company public, because answering to shareholders every 90 days was exactly what the fragile company needed. September 2017, Rovio goes public at 11.5 euros per share, valued at 896 million euros. On paper, the company looks like it's doing well, but going public meant that Rovio now had to meet shareholder expectations every quarter. 2 months in, rising costs to acquire new players spooked investors enough to send the stock down 20% in a single day. By February 2018, a weak revenue warning triggered a 46% collapse in one trading session. The company that had floated above $1 billion was now suddenly worth around 500 million. By the end of the first quarter, Rovio was the worst performing gaming stock in the world, down 59% from where it had started. Now, just when we thought Rovio was out of bad decisions, they would make another one. In 2019, Rovio would make a horrible discovery. Angry Birds 1 was coming up first in the search results, and to them, that was a huge problem. Now you might be asking, why is that a huge problem? And in their mind, when consumers saw that you needed to pay for the first game, they hypothesized that the consumer wouldn't want to pay and just leave, and they would essentially lose traffic from Angry Birds 2, their big moneymaker at the moment. So in July of 2019, Rovio quietly delisted the original Angry Birds without warning. The backlash was immediate, and the company would eventually be forced to issue a formal apology. It admitted that it removed the games without properly explaining why and had let fans down. Rovio said that many of the older games were built on technology it could no longer maintain to modern standards. And that was technically true, but it missed a big piece of the story. One former developer later said Rovio had described the removal as being done for testing purposes. Then, after years of complaints, Rovio appeared to listen. In March 2022, it released Rovio Classics Angry Birds, a paid remake of the original. 99 cents, no ads, no timers, and no microtransactions. Just the game people remembered and loved, and fans absolutely adored it. But less than a year later, Rovio would remove it from the Google Play Store and rename it on the Apple App Store. This time, the company was more honest about why. The remake was appearing above Angry Birds 2 in search results, and according to Rovio, that was hurting its newer games. As Rovio's community manager Sean Bucklew put it, "It is negatively impacting our other games, which is what we as a company have to focus on." So Rovio removed the game people wanted because it was competing too effectively with the games Rovio wanted them to play. And the most absurd part was how long they spent trying to fix this problem. Rovio's head of strategy Ben Matz said, "We spent the last, whatever it is, 10 or 11 months trying to solve this problem." Let me repeat that. 10 or 11 months of trying to actively stop fans from purchasing the original game. Marketing law number 2. Innovation is not optional. The business enterprise has two and only two basic functions: marketing and innovation. Peter Drucker, American management consultant. Throughout its entire history, Rovio never built a reliable pipeline for the next big idea. Rovio proved it could market, it could license, it could merchandise, and it could turn one game into dozens of revenue streams. But innovation is different than marketing, and the reason it matters so much is simple. Marketing law number 3. The first that comes to mind wins. It's better to be first than to be better. Jack Trout, branding consultant. I want you to think of sports drinks for a moment. You may not know which company invented the category, but the first name that probably comes to mind is Gatorade. And you'd be right, they were the first commercially successful sports drink. Think of American universities. You may not know which one came first, but the name that comes to mind is probably Harvard, and again you'd be right. That's what Rovio stumbled upon with their first multiplayer game, Mole War. It was the first game in a new category, and it took over. Then, Angry Birds took the destruction and launching formula of Crush the Castle and made it simpler, cleaner, and perfect for the touchscreen. It was not the first game with the idea, but it was the first game to be put on the App Store, and this gave them a significant advantage. As once a company becomes the name people associate with a category, people often assume it is the original and the best. Angry Birds 2 followed the same pattern in a different market, a free-to-play version of the formula built around in-app purchases. Both of these games ended up making Rovio unfathomable amounts of money, but when you look at the games that didn't become major hits, Need for Speed Carbon, Angry Birds Rio, Angry Birds Go, Rovio was entering categories someone else already owned. There was no new space to be claimed. And the more it expanded through different avenues, the less attention it had left for the one job that mattered the most: finding the next Angry Birds. By 2023, Rovio's revenue was falling nearly 8% year over year. Its biggest games were slowing down, Angry Birds 2 was still carrying the company, but there was no obvious next franchise ready to take its place. So when Sega offered them €706 million to buy the company in April of 2023, Rovio accepted. For Rovio shareholders, it was a way out. For Sega, it was supposed to be a shortcut into mobile gaming, but things didn't go as expected. In February 2026, Sega records a $200 million impairment on Rovio. In plain English, it had paid more than Rovio was worth now. Sega bought Rovio partly for Beacon, its free-to-play back-end system, hoping it could use it across its other mobile games. But the integration never delivered, Sonic Rumble struggled to acquire new players, and Rovio's profitability fell far below the forecast used to justify the deal. As it sits now, Rovio is a shell of its former self. But was there ever a version of the story where Rovio could actually succeed? Yes. Its strength was never with toys, movies, or licensing deals. It was simplicity. Games that people could pick up in seconds and keep playing for hours. Rovio proved it could do that more than once. The issue was it never fully committed to doing it again. Imagine if instead of chasing every new revenue stream, Rovio had treated Angry Birds as proof of a process. Make small original ideas, test them, listen to the players, kill the losers, and double down on the winners. Build the next franchise before the last one runs out of energy. Instead, every time Rovio was offered fast money, movies, merchandise, spin-offs, crossovers, it took it. And little by little, the company stopped building for the future, and it traded its long-term relevance for short-term gains. Now, if you like this type of video, hit that subscribe button and check out our course below. The lesson of Rovio is clear: all money is not good money, and the only constant in the world is change.